Yo, this is Real Sankara Hours. Real Sankara Hours. Follow us at Sankara Hours on Twitter. Also our Patreon. This is a free episode, but if you want our bonus episodes, where we have a lot of fun stuff, we do theory reading and rants. Subscribe for $5 a month. www.patreon.com/Real Sankara Hours, and our RSS feed, so you can stay in touch with us on Spotify and streaming services. Find our RSS feed at realsankarahours.podbean.com. We have a special guest with us. I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about mutual aid and the economic fallout of the pandemic. I'm Adam Hudson. Follow me at AdamHudson5 on Twitter.
And this is Peter MGunn. Follow me at MGunnPeter.
And I will let our guest introduce herself.
Thanks, guys. I'm Natalia. I'm anti-displacement coup on Twitter. Mostly tweet about gentrification. That's all I really care about. And I am part of the San Francisco Neighbors Solidarity Network. Thank you guys so much for having me on your podcast. It's an honor to be on a podcast named after Thomas Sankara. First of all, anti-imperialist and feminist hero. Thank you, guys. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. And Natalia and you and I have known each other for the past couple of years, so it's nice to, talk to you in general.
Yeah, always
Yeah,
enjoy our conversations.
yeah. So let's just get started. So, do you want to talk about Natalia, the kind of mutual aid work that you're doing, particularly in San Francisco, in light of the pandemic that's just been, you know, shutting down the entire world at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm working with a small group of friends and comrades on an effort which is called the San Francisco Neighbors Solidarity Network. I actually had this idea before the coronavirus happened, like sometime at the end of last year, just conversations with friends about trying to set up something that would basically be like a rapid response network um, all across San Francisco, with people in every neighborhood in San Francisco, where we could put out calls so that people could basically support people against threats of displacement. And that idea basically came from, the past 10 years or so of, doing tenant organizing and being a part of anti-gentrification and anti-displacement struggles. That this idea that there are many threats to displacement, your landlord raising your rent or trying to evict you is not the only one. And if we can strengthen those ties between, starting just in our own neighborhoods, between neighbors, and then kind of building it outward to be citywide, we could, build power and deal with those threats one by one. So that's basically the concept. I grew up in San Francisco, so I have a lot of ties to my neighborhood on the west side. And that was basically the idea for the Solidarity Network. And when coronavirus happened, that it just became like an idea that could immediately be put into action. So what we do is every Wednesday we deliver about 72 grocery bags to households in neighborhoods across the city. So really just North Beach, Chinatown, Potrero Hill, the Mission, South of Market, Western Addition, Fillmore, Park Merced, the Richmond, and in the future, if our organizing capacity grows, I would also really love um, to to be bringing free groceries to the outer neighborhoods of San Francisco as well, like the Excelsior or the Bayview. So yeah, what we do is we buy groceries, at a discount and through donations on Mondays, and we package them up. And then on Wednesdays, we are just spreading out and doing deliveries all throughout the city. And then after we've done our run of deliveries, we go around to some of the encampments with houseless people that we've made connections with, and we hand out sandwiches, water, fruit, and face masks, as well as any, kind of like warm items like blankets or jackets that we've been able to collect during the week. And that is what we do. And there's about 5 to 10 of us involved. We each have different roles. My friend is involved, who's a nurse. She's making homemade hand sanitizer for us to hand out. Some people do delivery runs in certain neighborhoods. And then, of course, we really try to take as many precautions as possible, get everybody on the same page in terms of, safety protocols, and try to make the whole operation as safe as possible.
So before I forget, if people want to contribute and help, like what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
Oh, for sure. So, thanks for asking. Yeah, we can be reached by email
Okay.
at sfneighborssolidaritynetwork@gmail.com.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to recommend somebody to be on our list, somebody who needs to be checked up on, you can send us an email that way. If you want to donate so that we can buy more groceries every week, that email is also our PayPal, and then our Venmo is at SF Neighbors. And that's how we take donations, through PayPal and Venmo. And then we also have a phone number. So basically, it's set up as a voicemail answering service. So people can call us at 415-347-1460 and leave a message about what their needs are. Um, and then we try to meet them.
Uh, Peter, do you have a question or something you want to add, or?
Um, yeah, it's interesting. First of all, I think it's mutual aid is very important in a time like this. But I guess my question is, because I've been doing my best to, I guess, stay at home and everything. So on the rare occasions I do venture out, I only get a limited understanding of like what it is like to live in a city in this time, and especially for like
Totally.
the vulnerable communities. I mean, where I live, there's been reports of like extra police crackdown. What is like been your experience of just like, I guess, the outdoor general life, and especially in the more precarious communities in San Francisco during
Yeah,
this
for sure.
pandemic?
Well, capitalism has a lot of crises, right? This
Mm.
particular one is one in which, I mean, yeah, we could say that all crises of capitalism are ones in which vulnerable people are made even more vulnerable. But I feel like this is really especially true, right now, in the context of what is a massive public health crisis. I think it's really hard. We have these neoliberal mayors in the Bay Area, and sheltering homeless people is not really a priority for them at all. In San Francisco, this is one of the richest cities in the world. Our hotel rooms have been paid for already, and homeless people are still not in them.
Wait, so sorry, but the hotels have been paid for?
I read something
Mhm.
that was saying that the city is spending $30,000 a day
Mm,
on vacant reserved hotel rooms that are supposed to go for up to 8,000 homeless people.
okay.
There's less than 1,000 homeless people in those hotel rooms now, um, you know, two, 2.5 months into the crisis.
And so basically, so there's still homeless people and a ton of empty hotel rooms,
Right.
and the two aren't they're not being met for some reason,
Right.
right?
Right. And the problem is,
Yeah.
that the shelters closed almost immediately, which makes sense, of course, because you don't want a lot of, people together in a confined space. But the problem is that there could have been an immediate transition where people wouldn't have been dumped en masse into the street, but that's exactly what has happened.
Wait, serious?
Yeah, I
Wait,
mean,
seriously?
the population of homeless people that are living on the street has skyrocketed in the last 2 months because the shelters are closed.
Oh my
Yeah, no, it's
God.
really bad, it's not just a public health crisis for houseless people; it's a public health crisis for everyone because we're all, coming in contact with each other. Um, but of course, people living in encampments on the street without protection, without masks, are extremely vulnerable. And I think there's like many layers to this. I was thinking the other day about how people living on the street, they have connections to different restaurants where maybe they can, they know the people that work there, they can get food, um, you know, uh, and that's something that's not happening either because all the restaurants are closed. So I think it's really scary. It's kind of like a
Right.
weird, uh, like boarded up wasteland out there, and homeless people are supposed to just uh you know figure it out on their own, which to their credit, a lot of the people that we have encountered are doing a actually really good job of taking care of kind of their immediate community in terms of an encampment. And I definitely see that one of one of our goals would be to try to support people who are taking care of each other within encampments.
So before this, SFPD were doing sweeps
Yep.
pretty
Yeah.
regularly,
Yeah.
right? Are they still doing sweeps?
I think that there are less sweeps than there were before. There's a lot of weird stuff that's been going on in the city. Right before this happened, the director of DPW was being federally investigated for corruption. This is like a close friend of the mayor and somebody who basically has orchestrated the street sweeps program over the past 20 years. So there was a lot kind of like in chaos right before this hit, and I think that it's like a very weird time because there's no real consistency to like what the rules are. On the one hand, like we're not getting parking tickets, which is great, and
Hmm.
on the other hand, street sweeps are much less frequent, because I think the city recognizes that if it's not going to do the right thing and put houseless people in hotel rooms, it can at least just not fuck with them, you know?
Mm.
So I think there's some of that going on. But you know, at the same time, it's this is still an absolute crisis of very vulnerable people.
So before we get yeah, because I want to transition into the larger systemic stuff, but the before we get into that, I do want to ask you, because I think it'll be really important for people who live outside of the Bay Area and outside of San Francisco. What is your take on Mayor London Breed and how she's been handling just the overall housing crisis in San Francisco, and particularly the treatment of houseless people and the issues of gentrification and displacement? Because I know, like, I think because sometimes London Breed's I guess her image
Yeah,
is a lot different than the reality of her term.
politics. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to, like, explain that. Like,
Yeah,
what's your take?
totally. Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's, you know, I said a minute ago that like the Bay Area has these great neoliberal mayors. I mean, in the East Bay, you guys have Libby Schaaf, who's kind of like basically the same thing as London Breed. But yeah, you know, is this these people that were put into office because, you know, they're, you know, friends with developers, they're friends with the real estate industry, you know, big supporters of tech. And that's where London Breed's politics are. Yeah, I mean, you know, she has a great like story, you know, origin story or something, in terms of like being from San Francisco, being, you know, raised in public housing in the Fillmore Western Addition, but she has total sellout politics.
Hmm.
And you know, I think that's kind of like the era that, you know, in a larger sense, I think that's kind of the era that we're in right now, right? Where like the viability of the Democratic Party to be seen as um, any kind of party that is looking out for, you know, working class people's best interests is like really waning. So much so now I think like, you know, politicians are really heavily dependent on having cool sounding biographical details, but really, really bad politics.
I was just so
Mhm.
there's this article in KQED, and they asked a bunch of real estate experts about the Bay Area housing post pandemics, like what's in store. So some of their kind of conclusions were rents will soften, but housing prices may not come down. Income inequality will grow. New housing construction might slow down. Um, but at the end, they say who will benefit, and they have two real estate experts, and they both say essentially that private equity firms and investors are the ones who are going to come out on top. I'm gonna quote Gustavo Lopez. So he said, when asked like who will benefit, he said investors, the ones at the top, that have the money in reserve. Those guys are basically going to come over and buy for cheap. Those guys are the guys that will win, and they will always win because they have the resources, they have the money, they have the reserves. And I want to connect this to a previous episode we did about the so-called bailout, which was really just
Mm.
a slush fund for Wall Street and corporate America. So like it's basically just trillions of dollars for free money for the big banks and large corporations. Meanwhile, like the reality you're talking about on the ground for some of the most vulnerable communities, and not, and also just for a lot of everyday regular working class people, like people are not seeing the relief that is needed, particularly with the severe economic fallout of this pandemic. Because I mean, every week the unemployment just grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
In April, the unemployment rate reached 14, 14.7%, which is the highest since the Great Depression. So we're basically at 15% unemployment. Um, there's an article in the Washington Post about grocery prices, which grocery prices saw the sharpest increase since 1974. There are many people who still have to wait months for their that $1,200 stimulus check.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if it's
Oh
not
yeah.
just immediately taken out of their bank account to
right.
pay outstanding debts.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
and also like the so-called job gains since the Great Recession have all been wiped out. It seems like even before this pandemic, there was already a crisis that was sort of peppered over by like a quote unquote recovery, but now this pandemic is showing is that like, okay, these jobs were already economically insecure and they can't take care of people during a massive public health crisis. um, and so now we're at the point where it's like, okay, there was a stimulus bill passed, but it really helped the balance sheets of the big banks. And now we're at yeah, and so now
Totally.
we're at the point where it's like I was saying, I'll just put this out. I'll just start off with this because we were talking about this before we were recording. The left is kind of like in this weird post Bernie stupor where it's like, okay, well, what the fuck do we do and call for? Because there is a massive public health crisis, but at the same time, people have to eat, people have to pay rent, and to me, it seems like the most logical thing is canceling rent and mortgage,
Yeah.
universal basic income, and nationalized healthcare, but which
Yeah, of course.
are pretty basic things, but like even within much of the left media, like that, there's not an aggressive push for that. So I just want to put that out there for what you guys think.
Totally.
Um, yeah, I guess I want to connect that to what you were saying about how there are multiple causes of displacement because in my own personal situation where I live in Portland, Maine is has like a similar sort of affordability crisis, and yeah, for various reasons I may have to leave the city pretty soon, but it isn't like but and I'm thinking about like am I being displaced from it? And it seems, displacement is this sort of
It's like
hidden
death by a thousand
process.
cuts.
Um, yeah, where because we're not like rounding people up and putting them on trains, it doesn't seem quite as traumatic. But there are a lot of like being forced to move because of economic circumstances can be pretty
Yeah.
traumatic in its own right. I guess like how have you been experiencing um, that phenomenon during the pandemic, and has the pandemic like
Totally.
accelerated it at all?
Yeah, so I think like thinking through this idea, I have more every week that we do this, I have more thoughts about like the work that we're doing and how it's connected to other efforts. But I think, one thing that I always come away with is that like you know, offering solidarity, uh solidarity is everything really, like, and if we are seeing ourselves as this, the part of this network of people who are fighting displacement in a city, many of us born and raised in San Francisco, many of us here for a long time, there's ways that even bringing free groceries to somebody, it's all part of the web of staying housed, staying in place, maybe fighting your eviction. Um, I just like to think of it as like, when somebody it goes on strike, right? When a worker goes on strike, there's a strike fund, and that strike fund goes towards making sure that that person and their family are able to put food on the table, regardless of whether or not they're going to work or taking home a paycheck, right? And that's something that we do ourselves because we want to see the strike succeed, right? So, in a lot of ways, coronavirus, we're all kind of like on strike right now, a little
Mm.
bit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
can't go to work. They don't, they might not, they can't go to work. They don't want to go to work. It's like, it's both, you know what I mean? Like, it's not worth it to go to work right now. So we're all kind of
Yeah.
on strike. And at the same time, we're expected to pay our bills and pay our rent. And so I like to think of the work that we're doing and, the work that anybody can do of, giving households free groceries is just support and solidarity to achieving the means of, having stability and being able to participate in, you know, struggles of staying in your home. There's a number of people on our list, I realized that are actually people who are, on rent strike.
Mm.
Um, they're people that have been fighting long term housing struggles. There's somebody who fought their eviction a few years ago and won.
Mm.
Um, and, I feel like also what we're doing is just like saying thank you to those people and like we want to support you.
Yeah. It's interesting because delivering groceries is something that should be like an integral part of, any form of
Yeah,
quarantine or
it should be
shelter in
something the
place, like
state does,
countries like,
really.
right, the state's not doing it. But the thing is that even sort of the major charities like Goodwill or, major food banks, I guess, it doesn't seem like they have the capacity or will to do it. And you said like the shelters, I mean, those are mostly run by like, Salvation
Nonprofits,
Army
yeah.
types. I guess yeah, like the nonprofit industrial complex, and they just emptied everyone out onto the street. So it seems to me that like sort of mutual aid solidarity networks are filling a gap that is left not just by the state, but also even by
Oh
charities.
yeah.
Can you, I guess, like, how does the difference in goal and also effect? What's the difference between like
Yeah,
solidarity
and I
networks and
want to
charities?
double down on that question as well because I think there is an actual distinction between mutual aid versus charity. And yeah, so like explain that difference because I think Peter, you're hitting onto something I think is really important because I think for I'm just trying to keep in mind people who probably are not familiar with the idea of mutual aid, what that concept is. Like, yeah, so go ahead and explain that, Natalia, 'cause I think that's a really important point.
Totally. So yeah, so like, what I was saying a moment ago was like I think of what we're doing as trying to just kind of strengthen this uh web, um and at the same time, building working class power, right? So, and I see this as part of an anti displacement. I mean, I see this as an anti displacement project, right? That if somebody knows that they are going to get groceries delivered to them every week, they can maybe have the um, confidence or whatever to continue, say, going on rent strike. We can like empower each other in different ways, and a lot of this basically was also just empowering people to shelter in place. Sheltering
Mhm.
in place is a luxury that not everybody has,
Yeah.
and so we wanted to take some of the burden off of particularly elders, to just support them in sheltering in place properly and minimizing their risk. So in terms of mutual aid, I think that this is about just supporting people in our community. Um, I think you're definitely right that, like, you know, so many of these nonprofits are just like nowhere to be found right now. Um, we're delivering bags of groceries to the Midtown Park Apartments, which Adam and I have both written about in the
Hmm.
past.
Yeah.
That's San Francisco's longest running ongoing rent strike, um,
Hmm.
of primarily Black seniors, who are longtime residents of the Fillmore Western Addition and are actually owed equity, that they are still fighting for. And I've been involved in that tenant struggle for a number of years now. So their interim property manager, when coronavirus happened, canceled their food bank program. And it's like, this is a
What?
time, yeah, this is the time when
What the
these
fuck?
Oh my god.
these yeah, should, this is the time when these services should obviously be ramped up. And instead they're just kind of like ducking out of their responsibilities. And thankfully, because, like, we've done a lot of close organizing together, and the tenants have been self-organized for so many years. That was something that we could take on ourselves, which is fine, because honestly, it's probably better that way. And that's something I think about a lot too, because it's like, yeah, I would, in Turkey and in Vietnam and China or whatever, they mobilize the like National Guard to deliver groceries to elders. I obviously cannot ever imagine that happening in the United States. Um, but so yeah, like, I think that there's things that the state should be doing. I believe in that. But on the other hand, I think that it's work that needs to get done. And, like, doing it isn't it's not a burden. It's a privilege, to be able to do that in our community.
I also want to add, particularly about Midtown and Fillmore. I think I probably mentioned this previously, but for people who are, I think, unfamiliar with the cultural history of the Bay Area and San Francisco, Fillmore used to be referred to as Harlem of the West. There's a very rich African American culture in San Francisco and Oakland and also Richmond, California, that, you
Yeah.
know, when we're talking about displacement, like, we're basically, you're like, these economic forces that displace people, you're also displacing culture and history. Like, there's
Yeah.
something rich there that, like, and this is like, part of my gripe with, why I think some of these sort of neoliberal technocrats who, like, their whole ideology when it comes to housing is that, like, they're not really in favor of rent control or public housing or any of those kinds of, like, massive systemic changes that would prevent displacement in the first place. It's like, hey, look, according to this graph, if we put X number of market rate housing, it will make the price of housing go down in year 2026.
Yeah.
And if you don't buy into that, you're a stupid NIMBY. You don't know what's going on. But I think, like, when it
Yeah,
comes to
it's totally opportunistic.
yeah, and when it comes to culture and history, you can't really put that on a graph,
No,
right?
you can't.
Yeah, and me personally, I play West African drumming, and one of the places I got inspired to do that was actually in the Fillmore. I was at a Black
Mm,
media event, and there was African drumming, and that was part of my inspiration to do what I do. So, and I just wanted to mention that, just that bit of cultural history that I think often gets overlooked when And I know you know this, Natalia, but like for people who are outside the Bay Area and are unfamiliar with the history, I think it's really important to consider, because when it comes to displacement and why people get upset is like, yeah, you're disrupting communities, you're disrupting culture, history, lineage, things that can't be put on a graph.
Yeah, talking about gentrification, I think uh yeah, one thing is that the whole concept of like YIMBYism is completely manufactured, astroturfed by real estate development companies, and it's not like a real thing. But the other problem is that capitalism itself requires a mobile workforce, and so it has like an active disinterest in promoting public housing. And a city that functions for capital has an active disinterest in sort of encouraging people to like
Mm.
live their whole lives in the city.
Same with rent control. Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And so the question becomes, and this is a question that's sort of been bubbling up mostly in academic circles, but I think it as that should be in the broader political conversation, is the question of who has the right to the city, right? Because people, in San Francisco, you have like teachers who have to commute an hour to teach in public schools and stuff, and the people who work to make the city run for the bourgeoisie are not even allowed to live in it. So yeah, the question I think that becomes important is like who has the right to live, in the city and enjoy like the benefits of the city.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. And it's gentrification, of course, is such a weird thing, because at the same time as gentrifiers are quote unquote enjoying the city, they're also kind of like sucking the lifeblood out of it, at the
Yep.
same time,
Hmm.
in terms of culture, you know. Um, yeah, no, that is something I think about every day for sure. And you know, gentrification, it's like we're living in occupied territories,
Hmm.
colonialism is an ongoing project, and freedom from colonialism or against gentrification, therefore, has to be a constant struggle in which we're fighting not just for our rootedness and like our right to live in a place, and um uh but also like for our cultures, right? um and I think in
yeah.
San Francisco, my I grew up, in the Western neighborhoods. My family is Russian. There's like a big Russian community out here. Um, San Francisco is such a unique place because all of our neighborhoods have different cultures and different ethnic groups, and um, we're losing all of that in gentrification, right? But then when you also look at it from the perspective of kind of like the ongoing project of colonialism, or the ongoing project of the United States of America, we're actually, the present moment is actually just like the precipice of like total cultural assimilation into the project of the USA, which is like a dreadful thing to think about in the larger picture, and I think about that all the time growing up in the city where, we used to have a really strong Russian community in my neighborhood. Um, you know, really, strong Filipino communities, Black communities,
Yep.
and their dispossession, is just creating this, yeah, a gentrified city. But yeah, I think, going back to Fillmore Western Edition, and like Adam, we could do an entire podcast about like Midtown and the Western Edition. But honestly, like working
Yeah.
with Black tenants in that neighborhood has informed so much of my politics and my understanding about gentrification, because like the cycle of Black land theft, in the United States and in San Francisco, in which like Black
Mm.
people are
Yep.
basically prevented
Mm.
by both private capital and the government essentially from accumulating property over generations and achieving, stability, community stability, is just like just one of the most insane conspiracies. I mean, real conspiracies. And it's almost like,
Yeah.
every 50
Yeah.
years, it's like, there in the 60s in San Francisco, there was redevelopment, right? Which was just like the wholesale dispossession of the Black community. Reparations are absolutely owed for that. 50 years later, we have, the mortgage crisis, the foreclosure crisis. um, Now we're having the loss of rent control. So land dispossession is like one of the roots of our struggle, because having a home and having stable housing is what allows us to participate in other struggles and endeavors, right? Like labor or art.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Peter.
I also want to say that it isn't like a metaphor of like settler colonialism, gentrification. I mean, well, there is also like a specific like indigenous urban, story and history, but also that the interest of land speculation that drove the settler colonial project and
The same
dispossession
companies, the
therein
Yeah.
are
same
the same
families.
interests. I
Yeah.
mean, in some instances, it's like literally the same companies. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I lived in San Francisco for a year in 2012, and then I came back a few years later in 2016, just like to visit for a couple days, and I was shocked at
Oh
even how
yeah.
much had changed then, and I'm honestly
Oh,
scared to go back now because I feel
dude,
like I wouldn't
dude,
even
like
recognize
I
the city.
remember. Okay, I'll tell a story that like really just there was something just so um like almost Twilight Zone, but like also infuriating at the same time. So so Dolores Park in the Mission District is like a very like it's a beautiful park. I remember back
Yeah,
this is 2011, so oh shit, going back to 10 years, almost 10 years. I remember
yeah.
I would go with my friends there, and like you had to hide your beer, you had to hide your alcohol, otherwise you get arrested for it, right?
Mhm.
I go back to Dolores Park back in fuck, what was it? I think it was like 20, I think late 2018 around there. Um and it looks it
Yeah.
no,
Right. It's
it's
it's a
dude, it's
total
fucking
mob scene.
Coachella. It looks like a goddamn
Yeah.
fucking Coachella
Yeah.
Instagram kind of phenomenon. And here's what was the most shocking is like there is this white dude dressed in whatever, I don't know what he was dressed in. He's like kind of funky, and he was selling me, he asked if I wanted to buy some weed brownies, some marijuana brownies, and I said no. But I stopped and I thought about it. I was like, you know what, if if if
Yeah.
if this happened like maybe 5 years ago, I'd get arrested, like just by being and it's like, wait, this white dude can just
Mhm.
sell pot just willy-nilly like at a a sort of wannabe Coachella area, and just be like, hey dude, want some pot, man? Like I'm gonna go up to this black dude and sell him some pot. And it's like, dude, if I like if that shit happened five
Yeah.
years ago, I'd be arrested, my life would be ruined. And I think about like all the numerous like black and Latinos whose lives have been fucking ruined by these sorts of very harsh drug war and other sort of uh policies. And it's like there's very little justice for them, especially since California legalized marijuana. There's very little
Yeah.
like, especially when we're thinking about reparations, there's not even reparations for them.
Yeah, Dolores Park is a good example of that because, that used to be a Latino park, you know. There used to be gang injunctions in Dolores Park,
Yep.
you know. And
Yep.
yeah, and
Hmm.
it's just gentrification is a
Yeah.
process. You know what I mean? It's like Dolores Park, there were gang injunctions that paved
Hmm.
the way for it to become what it is now. And so like understanding that gentrification is a process means that like we always have opportunities to intervene, you know?
Yeah, and also it's not people, especially developers, act like this process that didn't even exist 50 years ago is this sort of natural ebb and flow of the currents, and it's just something that is as old as time. And there's nothing we can do about. But that's not true. It is very much a deliberate and specific process that is undergone by
Totally, this
real
whole this
estate.
whole apparatus. Yeah, when I was thinking about this talk, I kept thinking about there's this like Hegel quote that I really like, that I think was like then kind of taken up
Mm,
by like the situationists. He says, what is good appears, what appears is good, right? So like we have this idea that the way things are, which is like class society, racism,
Yeah.
police violence, our built environment, like our very limited aesthetics, you know, exist within like this ordered appearance or of normalcy, you know? Um, and of course, like the counter to
mm,
this, I had hippie parents, so like I always there's this like Krishnamurti quote. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but it it is no
mm,
measure of
mm-mm.
health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Mm. I think I've heard that quote. Yeah, I thought it was Doctor. I thought did Dr. King do a similar quote?
Yeah, he
Yeah,
has a
that's
quote
that's what
like
I
that
do
too.
with this Krishnamurti quote. I'm sure it's like a very similar concept to just like, there's a lot of power in like the kind of like spectacle of what appears in our world. It doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean it's acceptable, because it's not.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up sort of the normalcy because I think that's something that's been weighing on my mind a lot right now is what is normal
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
look like as we know as we're settling in for,
Yeah.
this virus to be around for, another couple of years, right? Um what is
I
normalcy
I
going to
I'll
be,
jump into that
Are
actually because I've
we
been thinking about that because I mean, aside from freelance writing, I teach. I'm a teaching assistant, and look, like I finished graduate school a couple months ago, and my plan was like, okay, I get my MFA, go through that, and like I want to be able to teach and work in my community, basically. Both to like freelance writing, it's not stable income, but it's like, okay, if I can make a stable income, teaching in some capacity, and serving my community, like I could be fine. I can be content with my life. But like with this pandemic, it seems like okay, I don't even know if I can do that because I was talking to one of my supervisors about like, okay, what's the future of teaching going to look like? And so far, from what I can gather, definitely next semester when it comes to community colleges and definitely like the UCs and CSUs, most of the classes are going to be online or hybrid. So when it comes to physical one-on-one classes in education, the new normal seems like it's going to be online or hybrid education. And that's just education. And look, like most teachers are not prepared to teach online. Like especially, and I'm a millennial, like I'm thinking also about teachers who've had like been teaching for 20, 25 years. If you tell them, okay, switch to online education right now, you can't really wave a magic wand and tell a teacher whose entire pedagogy relies on face-to-face interaction with students, like you can't really just wave a magic wand and have them like switch all that to Zoom classes, because how the fuck do you get kids to pay attention on the computer, like, and how do you hold students accountable? And I think like when it comes to normalcy, like at this point, like there is no normal anymore, which I I think is both good and bad. But I think when it comes to whatever left wing response or response in general, and this is like kind of getting into my issues with people who are super obsessed with Biden versus Trump, because I think people who are settling for Biden as a lesser of two evils, I think Peter, you and I have been talking about this, but I think like sometimes when people vote for Biden, a
agree.
lot of it has to do with just nostalgia for some sort of normalcy that existed pre-Trump. Like, okay, if we can get Biden, I think when people are trying to vote for Biden, it's not really because they like Biden as a person. And to be honest, I don't think most people really like Biden as a person. I think the love for Biden is really like basically people want to return to the normalcy of the Obama era. Like if we could just go back to 2014 or 2011, which
Yeah.
is before the era of Trump, then things will be better. But the thing is that like I was saying this on a previous podcast I was on, Escape from Plan A, is that like I like the George
Yeah.
Jackson quote where he says, "Fascism is already here." Like the reality of
Yeah,
America in terms of like the level of institutionalized violence within our borders against Black people and other colonized people, especially Native Americans, that reality has always been bad. Like the normal state for Black people
hmm
is shit. is bad. Is consistent police
yeah,
brutality and mass incarceration and debt peonage and poverty. And even pre-COVID, I think there was a study done that showed that half of the country lives below or near
Yeah.
poverty, and that was pre-COVID, right? And so the previous
yeah,
normalcy was already bad. And I remember just as a reporter in 2013, one of my issues I had going to Guantanamo is that like I went to Guantanamo during the Obama years, the second Obama term, after he had promised to close it, and it was still open. So I think like going forward,
mm,
I think like we just have to just shed this notion that like things can go back to normal, and also like was the previous normal really good? And if the previous normal was not good, then like, okay, maybe we should chart a vision for a better future. But I think like when especially with the left's energy right now, post Bernie, it's like, okay, if we just get Trump out of office, like, okay, yeah, if you get him out of office, like what's gonna be left? The normal system of white supremacy and capitalism and imperialism just under another guy with I don't even know what people expect with Biden. Like
right.
I'm amazed he's
Hey, we don't know that
able
for
to
sure,
wipe his
Adam.
own ass at this point. Like the guy,
Come on.
You should, you shouldn't,
You know
yeah,
what happens when you assume things.
yeah. You shouldn't,
that's true.
you shouldn't presume things.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know. I take
yeah,
that back.
I
Yeah,
do want to
but
say,
I'm just amazed he's sentient.
I do,
That's yeah,
even that, I don't know, but I do think it's interesting the idea that if because yeah, the powers that be have to hide behind a veil of normalcy, but if we're accepting basically that there is no such thing as normal anymore, then sort of the nakedness of those structures becomes impossible to avoid. I mean, it's like, I will say about the people who are like clamoring to reopen, I mean, those not those specific, gun toting used car salesmen or whatever, boat salesmen. I don't care about them, but regular people who, I mean,
yeah,
everyone's kind of sick of this shit, honestly.
yeah,
I'm kind of sick of it too. And part of me like would like to go back to work, in the sense of just like, people, it's very hard when you are just sitting at home all the time and you don't feel productive. You don't feel like you're doing anything. But it isn't just like, oh, well, everyone just goes back to work. And even if like a million people die, like that's the price we pay. I mean, that's not how like the economy works either. So it seems that like we really are in quite a bind right now. And I don't see how, it's going to get resolved even by the
well,
No,
election.
nothing is going to get resolved by the election.
yeah,
I mean, I almost feel like it's not even going to happen, honestly. Like I can't really I can't, it's not really something I can picture happening right now, you know? Yeah, like with Bernie, when you were talking about like post Bernie fallout, whatever. Yeah, I definitely had a month there. I'm like, an anarchist in terms of like electoral politics. But I had a month there where I was like, oh my God, we're Bernie. It's really going to happen.
yeah,
Like, I like this guy. Like, um, but you know, they were never gonna let Bernie win, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
Like, the ruling class was never
Yeah.
going to let Bernie win, even though the people wanted him, like, clearly, you know? But, you know, like I said, like, we know what we want, so if anything, I think it's, like I think it's good that we could just you know, I'm trying to be positive here,
Mm.
like, to have a barometer check of, like, "Oh, there's yeah, right, just we do have mass support for, like, his ideas, you know,
Yeah.
like universal health care, rent control, like, you know, policies that are geared towards supporting and building up the working class. We know what we want. Like, we don't have to debate it anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And I actually think that, like, not voting now is our power, right? Like, okay, we have the ability to animate, like, the arena of electoral politics just to see what we're all thinking. But when that possibility is foreclosed upon, like, we can abandon it because we see what a farce it is. It probably always will be a farce. And then we just need to, like, get back to work.
Mhm. The good kind of work, not
The good kind of
Yeah,
work.
and
Yeah.
that's something that's I'm glad you said that, Natalia, because that's something that's been on my mind. Like, you know, like I feel the same way as Peter's that like it does suck to be indoors constantly. Like there are times I feel myself like, wait, am I going crazy? Like, what the,
Yeah.
it's very easy, and I think it is pretty, to use the term normal to feel that way. And I've been trying to think about like moving forward, and I've been critiquing the left mostly from a constructively, right? Because I do think that to whatever extent that the left exists in America, because there really is no organized capital L left, but I think you can say like there are like sort of at least sentiments and forces within,
The disorganized
yeah,
left.
disorganized
yeah.
and
There we
sentiments,
go.
yeah, disorganized left and sentiments and forces of the American population that whose politics actually is further to the left than the Democratic Party, right? So, and I've been thinking about like whatever institutional left that exists, like progressive media, and because I've been working in independent progressive media for a while, so I do think about this and like just sort of like evaluating like, okay, is there anything that we can do better going forward? And I do think that a huge segment of progressive media, independent progressive media, put too much eggs in the Bernie basket and didn't really address like, okay, like what should we do after Bernie? And also like not give him a pass for certain things, because right now the FBI, I think the Senate just passed a bill to let the FBI warrantlessly spy on your internet browsing history. And
Oh, right.
Bernie, so there was an amendment to that bill that would have gotten rid of that, and there were it needed to pass by 60 votes to meet that sort of dumb Senate threshold. um, and Bernie Sanders didn't show up to vote at all, and it failed. That
Yeah.
amendment failed to pass by one vote, and that's a huge fuck up on Bernie. Like, I'm sorry, like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna let this off my chest. Like, dude, that is bullshit. That's fucking bullshit for Bernie Sanders to like, look, you led this sort of army telling people that we're gonna wage a revolution inside the Democratic Party, but like
Yeah.
even Elizabeth Warren, who's not as left as Bernie Sanders, even she voted for that amendment. And it's like,
Yeah.
to me, that shows like
That's a bad look. Yeah.
how inept this strategy was to put all of the left eggs in this Bernie basket. Like, look, like, you know, look, I got caught up in the Bernie wave a little bit at times. I get it, like, because the left
Yeah.
is so used to losing, and it seemed like, okay, there seemed like there's a chance for the left to win with Bernie Sanders, because especially since the left is so fucking disorganized, like it does make sense. Like, yeah, let's get this guy in. But I do think it's we can't look at Bernie and the Democratic Party through rose-colored glasses, and I think that was, I think and just again, just to be constructively critical, I think there are too many people in the progressive media left circle that I think looked at Bernie Sanders through rose-colored glasses, and the fact that he didn't step forward on the Senate floor to add his vote to that amendment, which would have gotten rid of that provision, which allows the FBI to just straight up search your internet browsing history with no warrant, that is fucking embarrassing. Like
It is
it's fucking
embarrassing. Yeah.
it's someone who's reported to about Guantanamo for years and has been to Guantanamo, to see someone like Bernie Sanders who talks about revolution and all this shit, for him to not do that, that is fucking abominable. And it's like, I'm just like, at this point, this whole idea that like the left, and I agree with you, Natalia, like the Democratic Party was never going to let the left actually take power, because they're controlled by the very forces that keep workers and marginalized people and colonized people in a state of misery. So there's no way,
Yeah.
like, if you're representing a political force that's saying like, hey, we need to get justice for the number of black people who've been murdered by police, which still keeps fucking happening, or like rent control and all these other populist ideas. Look, the Democratic Party and the people who control it, they're the ones who don't want that. Like their whole way
Yeah.
of life and their interest is predicated on keeping that there. So there's no fucking way that the left was going to take over the Democratic Party unless, like, look, you're going to have to fight them.
Yeah.
And I just
Totally.
want to get that off my chest, because once I saw that FBI thing, I was just livid. I'm so fucking pissed when I saw that shit.
Yeah, I saw that. I will say that I didn't look all the way into it, but I'm sure that if you ask Bernie, I don't always trust those votes, like why, like they obviously were going to seize on it to make him look bad. I don't know. Maybe he should have voted for it. I also feel like the FBI does that anyway. So
Yeah, but
I'm
I
not
mean,
entirely.
well, it is. I think it is a bad look when people like Bernie Sanders and the entire Democratic Party are saying Trump is a big existential threat and we need to get him out of office. If you vote for a bill or don't lend your vote to an amendment that can give him less power, that's a bad fucking look. Like you have no leg to stand on. Because Bernie's
Yeah.
telling people, he's telling his supporters, you have to vote for Biden because Trump is an existential threat. Well, if you didn't vote for an amendment that would have at least curtailed a smidge a bit, because the FBI already has a ton of power, but like, don't give them more power. And if you can use whatever power you do have in the Senate, you should use it to prevent that from happening. And the fact that he
Yeah.
didn't, and he's telling people need to vote for Biden because Trump is an existential threat. Well, then you just gave Trump more power to spy on people. So you have no leg to stand
I
on.
mean, he gave Trump more power when he dropped,
Yeah,
when he dropped out,
yeah. So
when he let them force him out.
so it's just like
Like,
I'm just done with giving Bernie Sanders passes. Like it's bullshit. Like
yeah, totally. And
it's fucking bullshit. And I'm just sick of giving these people passes, especially like when it comes to shit like the war machine. Like, look, with this pandemic and all the resources we have that we put in our war machine, if we just basically just close all of our bases, all the money we spend on like F-16s and all these fighter jets, put that money toward a nationalized healthcare system, we'd be set. I mean, like, not totally
of
set, but
course.
like
Yeah, of
we'd be in a
course.
much better state than we are now. And there's no one in the Democratic Party mainstream, or any, not even the left, because I feel like the left has totally dropped anti-war stuff. This is where we're at, and it is kind of just, aggravating. And yeah, when I saw that bill, it's just like, look, my response was like, yeah, Bernie, wow, you really just, I don't know what to say, but
Yeah, yeah, he should have at least been paying attention to the optics of it. I don't know.
Yeah. It took me like, you know, 5 minutes to be like, okay, Bernie's not happening. Fuck it. You know what I mean? Because like, I mean, shit's embarrassing, really. I'm actually like
Yeah.
low key embarrassed that I was really feeling it for like maybe like a
I
month there. Um, but yeah, I have a friend who's an anarchist, and he was like, what Bernie should have been doing is just helping set up um just organizing efforts in in cities and towns and like rural areas all across the country, like helping to set people up to go on rent strike, to do all these things. Because there was definitely, those people seem to have like the structural, they had the network in place
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
And there's a lot that could have been done completely outside the arena of just the campaign and electoral politics that didn't happen. And like, why not? I mean, obviously, I think people can do all of those things on their own, and they don't need some, guy uh, showing them how to do it. But just in terms of like the energy and the structure that was there, like I totally agree with my friend, especially in retrospect, that all could have been happening. I mean,
yeah.
he could be doing that right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah.
But did you guys see the fucking, I like can't even, like, did you guys see the picture of AOC delivering groceries? Did you guys see that
Wasn't
in New
she like
York?
with the police though?
Yes,
What?
yes.
Wait. Oh, I didn't
It's
see that.
Adam, you have to see
What?
this. It's AOC in with AOC branded campaign bags, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Um being escorted through public housing projects with the NYPD.
oh, yeah. See, this is like I had to just let off that steam about the FBI because that just when I saw that I was just mad. But like, look, I mean, I think like I think like they're again to be constructively critical. I think too many people on the progressive left movement are looking through these leaders through rose-colored glasses, and I think I'm glad you brought up that example because that's try that's part of the reason why like I think it's important to push back against like looking at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar
Or
or
whoever,
whoever
yeah.
Well,
through rose-colored glasses. It's
Yeah,
I
it's like that's like absolute trash.
yeah.
yeah, it's extremely bad. I will say, I don't want to say I was on a Zoom call because it was really more like a webinar, but um AOC had a Zoom call with the DSA that, and even she like admitted that it was just like, yeah, we really can't do anything here in DC. We really need like an actual movement behind pushing us. And it is, and the problem is that we have now this sort of stan culture that
Mhm.
has migrated to politicians.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
can't, and this is like, I mean, in many countries, it's like you have the president and the prime minister. And the reason for that is that, like, you have the president do all the ceremonial functions of the state. And then the prime minister can be the one who can absorb all the hatred. And it's like, it's very weird on the left to see people not like just have a generic, like, yeah, no, I hate all politicians. Like, everyone suck. All of them suck. None of them should be trusted. That is like not even true in for many people on the left anymore. It's like only the right that will say stuff like that now, which is, it's very weird, and it's something that we really need to get past because
Yeah.
why, I don't understand the idea of ever like who, like, nobody's political career is that important, or ever like nobody's entitled to a political career. So I don't really care like what choices you have to make or don't make, and given given the environment and the idea that like assuming that you are like doing the best that you can, it still is just like, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether or not you are working hard enough. All that matters is like the results to the people you are accountable to, the people who put
Yeah.
you there. And
Yep.
for some reason, this is still like a hard concept for the left to really cohere around, because we're very hopeful and idealistic, I guess, because they haven't discovered the immortal science of dialectical materialism. And so it is just like, yeah, I mean, I agree. There was a month where I really, yeah, like right after, between like New Hampshire and after Nevada, I really
Yeah.
started to think like, oh,
God damn it.
and it was like extremely emotional for me. And part of it was just like the idea that like, yeah, there were for once there would be like an abatement of suffering. For once we would just get like, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be this terrible all the time. The world decided to do everyone a solid right now, but you know, that's just not going to happen. Like you can't, like, we have to do it ourselves. Nobody's going to do it for us.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the thing I think people haven't quite entirely internalized. And that's why,
Mm-hmm.
to bring it all the way back as we wrap this up,
Yeah.
that's why mutual aid and solidarity networks are so important. Like,
Yeah,
nobody else is going to do it but us.
and you know what? It's like that's not a bad thing, you know? Like I just wish that, we could just believe in ourselves a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And
Mm-hmm.
like this whole thing with going back to work and like what does our world look like? What is the future going to look like? And I think that like this whole situation has really revealed kind of like what an impoverished world we're living in,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where like when we think about the future, like all we can think about is like returning to the workplace or like,
Going back to
my
TGI Fridays.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, my friend was like my friend was like, what is there besides restaurants?"
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, there's museums and like there's some other cool stuff." But like we really everything is like so narrow that
Mm-hmm.
I just like my hope just maybe like on a more on a political and but also like on a spiritual level is just trying to like think of whether we can just make our world like bigger
Yeah.
and like uh you know capitalism's effect on like our world and our culture is so limiting,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like um but yeah, just if we can like think of something better and just kind of like now is kind of the time to demand it, you know what I mean?
Hey everyone, we had to split this up into 2 episodes. And if you want to hear more of our conversation, you're gonna have to become a patron. www.patreon.com/real Sankara hours. $5 a month gives you our bonus content, and that's where you can listen to this part two. So for patrons, enjoy part two. For those of you who are listening for free, we encourage you to support us.